Now, for more analysis ahead of tonight's meeting, joining us is Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute, as well as Hal Kemper, CEO of Global Risk Intelligence and Planning, and a retired Marine intelligence officer. I welcome you both. Thank you both for being here. Hal, let's start with you. Let's talk about why the committee is initially focusing on China and human rights, particularly when China is not the only country suspected of some major human rights violations.
Nicole, it's certainly not the only country that has this problem, but they do back a number of countries that have human rights problems. And of course, the issue with the Uyghurs is not new. It's been around for years. It's phenomenal in terms of its scope. Concentration camps that really harken back to things from, well, World War II in terms of their size and scope. And because of that, it's caused world condemnation. So there's a lot of focus on this. It's a place to start. It sets a backdrop for everything else that we're going to be discussing in regards to China.
All right, so a place to start, and how that's certainly fair. Jamil, to you, at this point, really doesn't seem to be a lot that Republicans and Democrats agree on. So what does it say that there is this bipartisan consensus when it comes to the U.S.-China relationship?
Well, I think it's clear that both folks on Capitol Hill, as well as Americans across the spectrum in the United States, are starting to realize what a strategic threat China is, both to us economically and as a national security matter. We saw what happened during the pandemic, our reliance upon China for PPE and pharmaceutical precursors. We now know about the reliance that we have on them for semiconductors and critical minerals. And I think what the chairman and ranking member are going to show in a bipartisan way is that the United States has to combat this threat working across political lines, and frankly with our allies in Europe, to get this right and to recognize that China poses a long-term national security threat to the United States, and in particular, it's the Chinese Communist Party that poses that threat.
And I want to talk about that threat, Hal. There's the spy balloon, there's COVID and where it originated. There is China's support of Russia, its threat to Taiwan, the popular app TikTok, so many different things. Talk about the threat that the influence China has not only on the U.S., but globally, and why that is potentially so dangerous.
Well, what they've done is they've embedded themselves into all sorts of things. They have this sort of view of unrestricted warfare. They see commercial activities, cultural activities, any type of interaction with other countries as a potential sphere of war fighting in a very broad sense. I should say fear of competition, probably our sphere of competition, probably a better way to describe it. But I see this when I'm in Africa. I see it when I'm in South Asia. I see it when I'm in East Asia, all over the world. Huawei and being embedded with 5G phones, and that being ubiquitous to how people communicate. And of course, TikTok software that they use around the world. They just see it as a complete thing. And then, of course, they have this rule, if you will, in China, that if in your commercial operation or if you're a Chinese citizen, that you have an obligation to serve the country in some sort of way. And what that means is you have companies and individuals engaged in espionage in ways that we just don't see with other countries around the world.
And Jamil, my last question will go to you. I mean, what do you think we're ultimately going to get out of this hearing?
Well, look, I think that what you'll see is a real description from a large group of officials, folks from China who are human rights activists, and American manufacturing representatives, demonstrating that there is consensus across the board, both in industry, in the private sector, from national security officials, as well as on Capitol Hill, that China is a real threat and poses a strategic national security threat to the United States, and that we have to take action here, strategic, smart action, to respond to that very real threat, to get the American people educated about it, and make sure that we are joined as a nation and as allies across the Atlantic and across the Pacific to really address the very real challenge that China poses in the long run to our nation.
All right, Jamil, Jaffer, Hal Kemper, thank you both. Well, President Biden's student